Okay, so good evening, everyone. First, I would like to discuss the Nobel Prize that is given to three people from economics background. Okay, although the prize is given to economists, okay, but what they have done is actually a sociological work. Okay, unfortunately, there is no Nobel Prize in sociology. For that matter, there is no Nobel Prize even in economics. Okay, the name is different. That is seen as or called as Nobel Prize. So what they have done, and they have referred to sociological literature themselves. I would like to talk about very briefly about that finding at this point of time that is not so relevant to you. Eventually, as we progress, you will realize that it is very helpful for us. What is their finding? पहले तो मैं उसको सिंपल भाषा में बताऊं. ये तीन लोग मिलके ये कह रहे हैं that what is the reason for so much of diversity in income between nations, that we have few nations which are super rich and many who are super poor. Very basic question, right? We can have discussion over this over a chai. Okay. But they have always, as you know, been scientists, and they would definitely collect data on that. And they have concluded after their research, which I'll be discussing with you, that the reason for 20% of the country having 30 times more wealth than the 20% of the poorest country is that those super rich countries have had political institutions which were more favorable to economic growth, and the other countries did not have those. What were those political institutions? कहने का मतलब है economic growth के पीछे political institutions, and they say social institutions are responsible, and political institution is just one of the social institutions. They are saying जहां जहां डेमोक्रेसी है वहां वहां ग्रोथ है, जहां नहीं वहां ग्रोथ नहीं. Okay, very broad generalizations, fine. And how do they explain this? They say we need to go back into the past times to understand how political institutions like democracy developed in these countries, which gave rise to economic wealth to this level, and how political institutions like authoritarianism, autocracy, dictatorship developed in other countries which could not generate wealth. Fine, this is the basic idea. And they say that to understand this, you have to go back into past. Many researchers have studied this phenomena, starting with Montesquieu. Montesquieu, in one of his books, Spirits of Law, suggests that climate factors are responsible for diversity of wealth across nations. The countries which are on equatorial plane are likely to be poor. The countries which are in temperate regions are likely to be richer. This was his idea. Okay. So many theoreticians have given different ideas. Some say biological evolution have been like this. Some say racial factors are there. Some say climatic factors are there. But these three people are saying political institution is responsible for rise of wealth. और ये बोलते हैं when colonizers were exploring the world, they came across some pockets where population was very dense. Okay. And those pockets also were having lot many diseases. Therefore, colonials decided we will not be staying here because so many people are staying here, they can kill us anytime. And there are so many diseases also in this area, we can get killed anytime. What were those areas? Those areas were Asian countries like India, China, and Africa. इंडिया, चाइना, अफ्रीका, यहाँ पे बहुत ज्यादा लोग रहते हैं एक जगह में और डिजीजेस बहुत ज्यादा हैं, हम यहाँ नहीं रह सकते भाई. ओके, अब क्या करें? बट दीज कंट्रीज हैड सो मच ऑफ वेल्थ, सोने की चिड़िया. ओके, जाने नहीं देंगे. So colonizer decided, we will, if not stay here, at least we will extract them. Okay, we can't stay here, but we will extract them for our benefits. And that is when a term which these three people have coined comes: extractive institutions. So what did they do? They extracted all the natural resources, जिसको दादा भाई नौरोजी कहते हैं drain of wealth. Okay, they extracted all the natural resources. They exploited cheap labor. Okay, from India, China, Africa, and that is how they started becoming rich. And then there were some pockets where population was not so dense and disease were also not there. Colonials thought we should stay in those pockets. And in those pockets, they developed what these three people call as inclusive institutions. Okay, दो बातें मैंने कही. एक तरफ colonizers installed extractive institutions, एक तरफ colonizers installed inclusive institutions. Okay, inclusive institutions means political democracy they installed, economic rights they gave to everyone, so that everyone start becoming wealthy. And they were very much comfortable in those areas. They stayed there. And what are those areas? America, Australia, New Zealand. Okay. And the other areas where they did not want to stay, but they wanted to extract wealth a lot from, were India, China, and Africa. So in these countries, which form of government established by colonials? Authoritarian. They were dictators. Okay. But in New Zealand, Australia, democracies were installed. Okay. And eventually, what happened? All those countries which were richer before colonization started becoming poorer. And all those countries which were poorer before colonization started becoming richer. These three call this phenomenon as reversal of fortune. Fortune पलट गए. जो सोने की चिड़िया थी वो सिर्फ चिड़िया रह गई. ठीक है. और जो चिड़िया भी नहीं थी उसको पंख मिल गए. ठीक है. सो रिवर्सल ऑफ फॉर्चून. अब इस पूरे थ्योरी में they have collected data. Okay, and they have collected data on mortality rate. They found that few countries had very great mortality rate, मतलब कि जिंदा रहने के चांस कम थे. Okay. What were those countries? India, China, and Africa. So higher mortality rate led to lower settler. That means very few European settlers came to these pockets and settled here permanently. And most of the colonizers settled in America, Australia, New Zealand because of lower mortality rate. Their chances of survival was very high in those pockets क्योंकि उन्हें मालूम था that population is very low here and diseases are also not there, so they can survive. इस बात को प्रूव करने के लिए they have actually studied one small country. अपनी थीसिस को प्रूव करने के लिए they have studied one small country. So this is this country, Nogales. Okay. Now, Nogales is one country whose upper half is part of USA and whose lower half is part of Mexico. दोनों अलग है, USA और Mexico. ठीक है. Upper part is belonging to USA and lower half belonging to Mexico. अब वो कह रहे हैं देखो जहां USA का जो Nogales है, Nogales is a country having almost, geographically it is one. Culturally it is one. All of them eat same things. All of them listen to same music. All of them have same language. Culturally there is no difference. Value system there is no difference. Geography there is no difference. Okay. The difference lies only in political systems. You will find in the upper half of Nogales, economic position of the people is very nice. Per capita income. Life expectancy is very nice. Education indicators very nice. Political health, very nice. Free election takes place after consecutive intervals. But if you talk about the lower half of Nogales, economic position of the people, super bad. Okay. Life expectancy, super bad. Education, super bad. Political health, super bad. Corrupt politicians are there. And there is nexus of politicians and criminal gangs. पाब्लो एस्कोबार वाला एरिया है ये, ठीक है, यहाँ क्रिमिनल्स पनपते हैं, ठीक है. सो नाउ these economists were actually shocked. ऐसा क्यों हुआ? क्योंकि the upper half was colonized by, or in the upper half had installation of inclusive institutions by colonizers, but the lower half had installation of extractive institutions by colonizers. कॉलोनाइजर जब आए थे तो उन्होंने इसको यूज किया था अपने खाने पीने के लिए और इसको यूज किया था अपने रहने के लिए. इसलिए वो जगह आज बढ़ते जा रही है और ये जगह खत्म है. इसका मतलब हिस्टोरिकल features of society and its origin must be understood to understand the level of development in contemporary times. And there are two colonization patterns. One is extractive, second is inclusive. This theory does not explain India and China. Okay. The theory which they have given does not explain India and China. Why? Because if extractive institutions like authoritarianism, autocracy, or weak rules of law, or dictatorship, or weak property rights of people uh, are not conducive to economic growth, then how come China is growing? Because there they have authoritarianism, there they have dictatorship or weak rules of law, not enough freedom of speech is given. How come China is growing then? They are not able to explain that. नोबेल प्राइज का दिक्कत पता है क्या होती है? किसी भी प्राइज के साथ दिक्कत पता है कब होती है? फिल्म स्टार को छोड़ दे, अगर बॉलीवुड को अगर छोड़ दे, इन लोग को ना रिकग्निशन तब मिलती है जब इनको काम किए हुए 10-15 साल हो चुके. दे डिड देयर वर्क वे बैक इन 2001. अब जाके नोबेल प्राइज मिलने का क्या मतलब है? सो मेनी थिंग्स हैव चेंज्ड सिंस देन. एंड अभिजीत बनर्जी, okay, had clearly questioned them that you can't explain China's growth despite extractive institutions, and you can't explain that why India could not grow as much despite inclusive institutions. That we had democracy right after colonials left us, still we could not grow. Okay. And China had authoritarianism, still they are growing. This is called as Chinese and Indian exceptionalism. 1/3 of humanity can't be explained by this theory. Okay. So theory, to a very great extent, is example of positivism only. This is example of positivism only. Wherever we have democratic institutions, economic growth takes place. Generalization. Okay. And they are actually proponent of democracies. And they are also very ethnocentric in their way of looking at world, looking down upon China, looking down upon Chinese model of governance, trying to promote democracy. This is critical way of looking at things. Okay. And they are saying wherever there is centralization of power, like China, growth cannot take place. Okay. But centralization of power is the rule of human society. Wherever we go, even in democracy, power is to be centralized. Okay. So these questions they can't answer. And whatever they are trying to answer, now this is already discussed by many sociologists. Already discussed when we will study Unit 10. So there we'll talk about some theories which have already discussed these. Okay. So basic idea जो था उनका वो यही था, it is not geography or culture, but the political and economic institutions set up during colonial times which influences the patterns of prosperity. Okay. ये बेसिक इनका आर्ग्यूमेंट है और this is something that I have explained here, and इसको अभी हमें पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं, but We will be using this once we talk about chapter 10, जो last chapter होगा हमारा. Okay. And also we'll be using this theory uh, as a critique to many theories also. And sometimes we will subject this theory to criticism. Okay. Eventually it is a theory only, even. It is not the fact. Okay. Or final truth. Anyway. So इसमें मैंने बस इतना ही explain किया था that countries with higher settler mortality, that means where the chances of survival is very low, in those countries there were low settlers, and those countries were used to extract resources. And finally extract resource करने के लिए क्या चाहिए होता है? एक authoritarian regime चाहिए होता है, strong. That is why many Indians were not given representation initially. Okay. Strong British Raj था in all the councils assemblies. Indians को representation नहीं था. Okay. So extractive institutions means authoritarian centralization of power and very weak rules of law. That means people are not allowed to speak freely. People are not allowed to hold private property. Okay. Eventually, this resulted into dysfunctional economic system and weak rule of laws. And there were some countries where there was low settler mortality. That means low chances of people losing their life. People means colonizers losing their life. There they settled more, and there they installed inclusive institution, which means democracy, which also means they had nice rules of law, and they also offered everyone right to own property because they themselves were staying there, so they wanted to ensure that everything is good for everyone. Okay. And that is how those which encourage property rights, broad economic political participation, rule of law for the long term benefit of locals, and eventually prosperous economy and strong rule of law is found in such countries today. एग्जाम्पल इसका वो देते हैं यूएसए. क्यों? क्योंकि खुद यूएस के हैं. खुद यूएस के हैं इसलिए यूएसए की तारीफ करेंगे, है ना. नो रिसर्च इज वैल्यू फ्री. नो रिसर्च इज वैल्यू फ्री. ये सब मिथ होते हैं. ओके. द सोशल पोजीशन ऑफ रिसर्चर इन्फ्लुएंसेस द रिसर्च फाइंडिंग्स. सीधी सी बात है. ओके. और अल्टीमेटली रिवर्सल ऑफ फॉर्च्यून. जो लोग अच्छे खासे अमीर थे कॉलोनाइजेशन से पहले, वो गरीब हो गए, और जो गरीब थे यूएस, वो अमीर हो गया. ठीक है. Areas which were wealthy before colonization became relatively poorer due to extractive institutions. Areas which were poor before colonization became relatively wealthy due to inclusive institutions. Okay.